What is going on, YouTube? I wanted to talk about one of the craziest stories I saw come out of the 2024 election. So first, let me tell you a story about what I was doing on election day. Me and my roommate go to Costco, grab a pizza, and he wants to watch TV. He's not really a political guy. I tell him I want to watch the election. And he asks me, how do you watch the election? I thought you just waited to see what the results were and found out who the winner was. And I told him that you could do that, but when you watch the news, they'll tell you in real time who's winning the states and what path left over to victory there is, all that fun stuff. It's a little more of an event. So he was sitting there watching it with me, and he's, again, not really into politics. And he sees Kamala Harris wins a state, and he's like, is it just Kamala? Where's Joe Biden? And I turned to him and I'm like, you don't know Joe Biden dropped out? And he was like, no, I didn't. And I'm like, you're serious? Joe Biden dropped out in July and he didn't know about it until election day. I thought that was weird. I made fun of him for it, of course, but moved on. A couple days later, a news story drops. It's all over the place. And apparently, there was a lot of people who didn't know Joe Biden dropped out. Let's take a look here.
Tonight, we're looking into a story that may be hard to believe. It claims internet searches for "Did Joe Biden drop out?" jumped on Election Day yesterday, indicating a number of people were just discovering he wasn't running. And it's actually true. According to Google Trends, the searches for "Did Joe Biden drop out?" started spiking about 6 a.m. yesterday and continued to rise over the course of the day until reaching its peak at midnight. It then started to spike again around 8 o'clock this morning. Prior to yesterday, there were virtually no such searches. President Biden, of course, dropped his re-election bid back in July.
That was nuts. I couldn't believe it. I saw, fact or fiction. I thought that I fell for an internet hoax, but turns out it's true. There were actually quite a number of people who did not know Joe Biden dropped out in July, which kind of begs the question of what kind of bubble some of these people live in and whether or not these people vote. There isn't really no way to get that data, honestly, on whether or not these people who are Googling that voted. I mean, my roommate doesn't vote, but for all we know, a lot of these people were voting. So I wanted to take a look at the states that Trump won and the states where this was being Googled the highest, or rather, I should say, the states Trump won, the swing states, and what scaling this was at in each of those states. Now, the way Google Trends works, for those who aren't familiar, is that they use a relative scale out of 100, 100 being peak popularity, 50 being half popularity, and then 0 is insufficient data. So let's take a look here at the states side by side. So the first states of interest are the so-called blue wall: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Donald Trump winning all three of those, of course. And then let's look at Wisconsin first. So Wisconsin was 60 points of interest out of 100. And then Michigan was 62. Pennsylvania, 63. Another important swing state, Nevada, we're at 51, which is not as bad as the blue wall, but still pretty bad. But all over, there's different degrees of interest in this term, in this search. Now, of course, it's hard to draw a correlation between how often this was Googled and whether or not Trump won. Like, if there was a clear, like one of the highest interests, Vermont, 77, that's on the higher end. New Hampshire, 75. The states that had higher searches for if Joe Biden dropped out do not directly correlate to whether Kamala won or lost. It would paint an interesting story if the states that it peaked out at were ones that Kamala lost, but it actually doesn't really paint that picture. It is a little concerning that in the swing states, there are people who maybe thought that Joe Biden was going to be there and saw Kamala. Again, there's no, as far as I know, way to tie how many people who voted were Googling this, and the trends don't line up, but it's still an interesting narrative. In fact, if we look over here at the top 5 states peaked out in DC, if you can believe that, of all places. Maryland, Minnesota, Vermont, Nebraska. So the top 5, 4 out of the top 5, Kamala won. Let's bump it to top 10. Once we expand out to top 10, there's still only one state Trump won, looking at Idaho. But for the most part, we go to top 10 of these Google search states. Kamala only lost 2 of them. Okay, so now once we go to top 15, we start hitting some of the big states that he lost, or that Kamala lost. So it's a bit of a reach to push the narrative that people not knowing Joe Biden dropped out is why Kamala lost. But I think it's funny. I think it's a funny thing that people are Googling that. If this had any impact on the election, that would be crazy. I'm dying for some data to come out that like proves that was a bad decision, because a lot of Democrats are thinking that Joe Biden shouldn't have dropped out, because the whole point of him dropping out was that they were scared Trump was going to clobber him, and he ended up beating Kamala. George Clooney, the guy who spearheaded the movement for Joe Biden to drop out with his op-ed, is under flack now too, because the Democratic Party is starting to, or the Democratic base, I should say, is starting to regret the decision of Joe Biden to drop out. I have no problem with Joe Biden dropping out. I just have a problem with the fact that I genuinely believe they intentionally downplayed his mental illness until after primary season to avoid a challenger, most likely one that's more sympathetic to the Gaza war, maybe a more progressive candidate. Anything the Democratic Party can do to snub progressives, they'll take it. But I think it's funny that they regret it. This data point that people didn't even know Kamala was taking over it's not definitive proof that they messed up by switching the nom. For all we know, Joe Biden still would have lost. Personally, I think if they had any shot, you had to have stayed on the ticket that you ran on. You know, what kind of message does it send to voters that you don't realize a problem is there until the last second and then try to have a makeshift solution? That's not what people want. The switching of the nom, unprecedented, could not have helped the campaign. And this stuff about people not even knowing that Joe Biden dropped out, the narrative that hurt them based on this data is not really that strong, but there's no way that could have helped them. There's no way. There is no way that was helping them. That could have been a disaster among other disasters. So I hope the Democratic Party learns a lesson that have a free and fair election. Do not run on saving democracy while snubbing democracy, while having an unelected candidate run at the top of your ticket. Have primaries. Let the people be heard. Run on a progressive campaign, and better luck next time in 2028. We really let Trump with absolute power come in twice because Democrats refuse to do the most basic things to make themselves electable against Republicans. I thought this was very funny that this happened. If we look past, let's just do past 90 days, that's about as close as we can get to when it actually happened. There was a little bit of interest maybe a month later, likely around when the Democratic National Convention happened. I don't remember off the top of my head the exact date. I just know it was like mid-August, maybe a little bit in November, but there was a huge spike on Election Day and around Election Day the days following. So their messaging wasn't good. Their campaign wasn't good. I hope this is not something that the Democratic Party ever attempts again. If your candidate isn't good, own that at the beginning and have a free and fair election. Don't run on democracy while trying to have unelected officials and party domination of the narrative and who wins. Yeah, it's over. Trump is in control. His agenda is going to get passed. And all we can hope for is that in 2028, we get a genuine progressive movement that can maybe undo the damage Trump does. There's a lot of solutions to everything Trump does. Nothing he does is permanent. He can be erased from history if we're bold enough, if the Democrats have the guts to do it. I'm hoping in 2028 that the person runs the Democratic Party, who's the new leader of the Democratic Party, can fundamentally change the party the way Trump changed the Republican Party, but not in the same direction, obviously, but Trump redefined what it means to be a Republican. All the Bush-era stuff is gone, and now being a Republican means something completely different. The Democratic Party needs fundamental change, and that's a bit of a tangent, but it's relevant. So hopefully they have some good lessons learned. We know Democrats never do. In the meantime, Please follow my channel for more political analysis, more commentary, more rants, opinions. Like the video for the algorithm, comment something, stick around, let me know what you think. If you're excited for the Trump administration or you're worried, let me know all that in the comments below, and I will catch you guys around.